Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Welcome everybody to our session number 28. We're getting through to this book. Not much left to go. Um, this chapter we're going to be reading today is also one of my favorite, well, maybe not the favorite, but it is an interesting chapter nonetheless. Um, just before we start, just let me predicate something that you should keep in the back of your mind as we read this chapter. Remember that the chapter of Enoch, which is the fourth chapter of the Fusus al-Hikam, is rubricized by Ibn Arabi um, under the attribute of holiness or Qudusiya, right? And as we learned in that chapter, and also as the commentators then amplify, this attribute of holiness or Qudusiya is one of the attributes of transcendence or Jalal, according to Ibn Arabi. And here in this coming chapter, um, the opposite is going on, even though Elias and Enoch are claimed by Ibn Arabi to be actually the same person. So you should keep this in mind because there is this dualitude of transcendence, immanence happening, and whereas under the name of Enoch he was the transcendent. Here as Elias, he is the immanent in the attribute of intimacy. Although this is not completely apparent as we read through the chapter, unless one stops at various points of this chapter on certain asides and angles that Ibn Arabi is taking with it. So without further ado, the wisdom of intimacy, al-hikmat al-inisiya, in the word of Elias, fi kalama Eliasiya. He says, Elias is the same as Idris, who was the prophet before Noah, whom God had raised to a high rank. He resides at the heart of the seven celestial bodies, which is the sun. He was sent to the settlement of Baalbek. Now, Baal is the name of an idol, and Bek was the ruler of that place, the idol being special ruler. Elias, who was Idris, had a vision in which he saw Mount Lebanon, which is from Lubanna, meaning a need, splitting open to reveal a fiery horse with trappings of fire. When he saw it, he mounted it and felt all his lust fall away from him. Thus he became an intellect without any lust, retaining no link with the strivings of the lower soul. In him, God was transcendent, so that he had half the gnosis of God. That is because the intellect by itself, absorbing knowledge in its own way, knows only according to the transcendental, nothing of the immanental. It is only when God acquaints it with his self-manifestation that its knowledge of God becomes complete, seeing him as transcendent when appropriate and as immanent when appropriate, and perceiving the diffusion of God or the flow of God, saryan of God, in natural and elemental forms. Indeed, he sees the essence of the reality to be their essence. This is complete gnosis, which the law sent down from God brings all fancies being determined by this gnosis, which is a very interesting perspective on the nature of Sharia, because what Ibn Arabi is basically claiming here is that God is perceived as the immanent through it. For this reason, fancies have greater power in this human makeup than the intellects, since the intelligent man, however mature his intellect, is never free of fancy and imagination in what he decides on. Indeed, fancy or wahm is the greatest authority in this whole human form. Now, here we should be a little bit aware that there are two senses to this word of wahm, which otherwise is also translated as delusion. But in this first sense, Ibn Arabi is actually using this positively and making it a synonym with the imagination, the khayal. Through it, there come the revealed decrees, at once comparing and making him transcendent. But fancy or wahm, as a faculty of imagination, they liken him in making him transcendent, and by the intellect, they make him transcendent in likening him. Each is inextricably bound up with the other so that the transcendence cannot be unaffected by likening or vice versa. The likening here being the immanent function. He says, there's nothing like unto him, laisa kamithlihi shay'in, where he makes transcendent and likens, or imminent. He also says he is the hearing, the seeing, وهو السميع البصير, thus likening himself. Oh, the former verse is the greatest expression of transcendence. The word like, or the particle ka, shows that it is not unaffected in principle by likening. However, he knows himself best, and this is the way he has experienced himself. He says further, may thy Lord, the Lord of might, be exalted beyond what they describe. That is, they describe him only according as their intellects dictate. He therefore puts himself beyond their insistence on his transcendence, because such insistence, in fact, limits him by reason of the inadequacy of the intellect to grasp such things. Then the revealed decrees bring what the fancies determine, or what the imagination determine. Indeed, God is never without an attribute in which he is manifest, as all scripture attests and reveal. It is in accordance with that the peoples act, God having bestowed on them his own self-manifestation, and they are attached to the apostle as an inheritance. They speak as God's apostles speak. God knows best where to place his message. The word God knows, Allahu Alam, maybe God knows best, may be seen in either two ways. First, as predicative of messengers of God, and second, as subjective to where to place his message, each way revealing a particular truth. It is for this reason that we speak of likeness in transcendence and transcendence in likeness, or transcendence in immanence and immanence in transcendence. Once this is established, we let down the covering and draw the veils over the eyes of the skeptic and the dogmatist, even though both are forms in which God manifests himself. We are ordered to draw the veil in order that the disparity among forms regarding their readiness to receive the self-manifestation might become clear, and to show that he who manifests himself in a form does so only according to the degree of receptivity of that form, so that what is attributed to him by that form is only such as its reality and inherent qualities dictate. Such is the case with someone who has a vision of God in his sleep and accepted as being God himself without reservation. In this case, the realities and inherent qualities of the form in which he is manifest in sleep pertain to the sleeper. After sleep, what was seen while sleeping might be expressed in terms of something other, which will compel the intellect to recognize God's transcendence beyond that form. If the one who interprets it is a man of insight and faith, then it need not necessarily be dismissed in favor of transcendence, since such a man can accord what was seen in due share of transcendence and of that in which he was manifest, since the name God is in reality but a verbal expression for one who understands what I'm talking about. The spirit and essence of this wisdom is that everything may be divided into that which affects and that which is affected. This is one of the most difficult arguments of Ibn Arabi, both of which are denoted by certain expressions. So the mu'assar and the mu'athar fihi is the Arabic. That which affects and that which is affected in it. That which affects in every way, in every instance, and in every situation is God. Well, that which is affected in every way, instance, and situation is the cosmos. Al-Kawn, or if we can transpose cosmos, Al-Kawn for al-Maluh, the divine thrall, or that which is Goded, which is the cosmos. When what we have spoken of comes to you, then attach everything to its appropriate origin. For that which comes on you is inevitable and always derives from some origin, just as the divine love springs from the supererogatory acts performed by a servant. Just take a quick sip of this coffee. This is an effect affect that occurs between that which affects and that which is affected, just as God is the hearing, sight, and powers of the servant by virtue of this love, right? What Ibn Arabi is trying to underscore here in this difficult language is that at both poles of the effector or the cause and its effect, right, God is present. Okay, it's because the whole universe is permeated by God on every level, whether on the level of the cause, or whether on the effect, whether the effector or this receptacle, right? This is an effect that occurs between that which affects and that which is affected, just as God is the hearing, sight, and powers of the servant by virtue of this love. This is an affect that is confirmed in divine law and cannot be dismissed if one is a believer. One of good intelligence will either be aware of a divine self-manifestation in the natural order so that he grasps what we're saying, or as a Muslim and a believer will simply believe it because it appears in the Sahih, in the corpus of Hadith. There can be no doubting the power of fancy or wah, aka theol, to prevail over the intellectual inquirer into what God has brought in this saying, since he is a believer. As for the one who's not a believer, he tries to overcome fancy with fancy, imagining in this rational way that he has invested God with what that self-manifestation accorded to him in what he saw. In that case, unknown to him, the fancy will never leave him, being ignorant of himself. Concerning this, God says, "Call upon me and I will answer you. And when my servant asks concerning me, then I am near to respond to the call of the suppliant when he calls upon me. For he does not answer unless there be one to call on him, even though the essence of the suppliant and of him who answers is the same." There is no real conflict implicit in the variety of forms. They are, in fact, twofold. All these forms are like the limbs of Zayd. It is quite clear that Zayd is a single personal reality, that his hand does not look like his foot, head, eye, or eyebrow. In other words, he's multiple and single, multiple in form and single in essence, just as man is without that one in his essence. We do not doubt that Amr is not Zayd or Khalid or Jafar, nor that the various individual parts of this one essence are infinite in existence. Thus, God, although one as his essence, is multiple in forms and individual parts. If you are a believer, you will know that God will manifest himself on the day of resurrection, initially in a recognizable form, then in a form unacceptable to ordinary belief, and finally back into a form readily recognized by belief. He alone being throughout the self-manifesting one in every form, although it is obvious that one form is not the same as another. It is as if the single essence were a mirror, so that when the observer sees him in the form of his belief about God, he recognizes and confirms it. But if he should see in it the doctrinal formulation of someone of another creed, he will reject it, as if he were seeing in the mirror his form and then that of another. The mirror is single, while the forms it reveals are various in the eyes of the observer. None of the forms are in the mirror wholly, although the mirror has an effect on the forms in one way and not in another. For instance, it may make the form look smaller, larger, taller, or broader. Thus, it has an effect on their proportions, which is attributable to it, although such changes occur only due to the different proportions of the mirrors themselves. Look then into just one mirror, without considering mirrors in general, for it is the same as your beholding him as being one essence, albeit that is beyond all need of the worlds. As being the divine names, on the other hand, he is like mirrors in the plural. In which divine name have you beheld yourself, or who is the one who beholds? It is only the reality of the name that is manifest in the beholder. Thus it is, if you will, but understand. Do not distress yourself nor fear, for God loves courage, even if it be in killing a snake, which snake is nothing other than yourself. Now, to a snake is a snake in the form and reality, nor is anything killed by itself. Even if the human form is corruptible physically, its essential character will maintain it, nor will the imagination desert it. If this is how things are, then it is the guarantee, strength, and defense of the essence of things. And what strength is stronger than this? You imagine by fancy that you have killed yourself, although the essential form survives in the intellect and the fancy, according to its original definition. Great argument against suicide. Evidence of this is his saying, you did not shoot when you shot, but it was God who shot. The eye of the observer perceived only the form. Hold on just a second. Okay. The eye of the observer perceived only the form of Muhammad, which is to the physical sight clearly appeared, which to the physical sight clearly appeared to shoot. This is the form to which God firstly denies the act of shooting, which he then goes on to confirm in the act, finally reaffirming that it was God who shot in the form of Muhammad. In this matter, faith is very necessary, so consider its effectiveness in that God was sent down in a Muhammadan form. This is one of the central key motifs of the Akbarian metaphysics and soteriology and overall ontology that basically exploded and changed the terrain of Islamic philosophy, mysticism, theology. Because essentially what Ibn Arabi says here and throughout his other writings is that all of the prophets, all of the messengers, all of the saints are essentially manifestations of God. So although implied and even explicit, for example, in many of the Shiite writings and the Hadith, in the Sunni world, this was not the doctrine. Even with the Sufis, who kind of meandered back and forth over this idea. But here, Ibn Arabi explicitly lays this down as one of the ways in which the whole idea of the insan kamil, the complete human, can be understood. That these humans, complete humans, are essentially manifestation, mazahir, of the Godhead. It is God himself who has related this to his servants, not us, but he himself. Now, his word is true, and to believe it is obligatory. Whether one grasps the significance of what he has said or not, whether one be a learned man or just a believing Muslim. An indication of the weakness of intellectual speculation is the notion that a cause cannot be also the effect of that to which it is a cause, such as the judgment of the conflict or the science of divine self-revelation. It is known that a cause may be the effect of that for which it is a cause. I basically took this entire argument in the very first chapter of my Effulgences of Wisdom, and then using some of the Gnostic scriptures, like the one about the generation of Adam by Sophia, basically argued this, and from the basis of some of these Gnostic scriptures. The judgment of the intellect is sound, provided that the speculation is clear and thorough. The most that the intellectual would admit to on this matter, when he sees that it contradicts speculative evidence, is that the essence, after it is established, that is one in the many as a cause in some form or another of an effect, cannot be an effect to its effect, so that the effect should become its cause while it is still a cause, but that its determination becomes changed by its transformation in form, so it may thus become an effect to its own effect, which might then become its cause, right? Several of these Gnostic scriptures talk about the generation of Adam by Eve before Eve's own generation, such that what happens in these Gnostic scripture is that you have the Eve in a celestial form and then Eve in a terrestrial form. So she is the mother of the living, both as the progenitor of Adam, as the one that gives life to Adam, and then she comes into existence after Adam's existence, right, to become his mate, his soulmate. So she is both the mother and his daughter and his wife simultaneously. So these Gnostic scriptures, this is where Corban, Corban's focus on several of these Gnostic scriptures and whatnot was very apropos in the way that he would then gloss upon even the metaphysics of anatomy, because this sort of causality is very much present in some of these Gnostic doctrines and scriptures. This then is as far as he will go when he perceives that the matter does not agree with his rational speculation. If such is the case, in the matter of causality, what scope can intellectual speculation have in other more difficult questions? They have been none more intelligent than the apostle. God's blessings be upon them, and what they brought to us derived from divine majesty. They indeed confirmed what the intellect confirmed, but added more that the intellect is not capable of grasping. Things the intellect declares to be absurd, except in the case of one who has had an immediate experience of divine manifestation. Afterwards, left to himself, he is confused as to what he has seen. If he is a servant of his Lord, he refers his intelligence to him, but if he is a servant of reason, he reduces God to its yardstick. This happens only so long as he is in this worldly state, being veiled from his otherworldly state in this world. The Gnostics appear in this world as if they were in worldly forms by reason of its apparent effect on them, but God has transformed them inwardly into their otherworldly state, without a doubt. Veiled in their forms, they remain unknown except to one whose inner sight God has uncovered to perceive spiritual reality, nor may anyone know God in his self-manifestation except he be in his otherworldly form. Very interesting. He has already been gathered in for the hour in this world and is brought forth in the grave, for he can see and witness what you cannot, as evidence of God's caring for certain of his servants. Which means that for the Gnostic, the Qiyamah happens to them right now. It is not an event in a horizon of the future of a timeline, right? The Gnostic, the true Gnostic, has experienced the Yawm al-Qiyamah, the hour, the Sa'ah, etc., within themselves. They are in them. The Gnostic is inhabiting the true religion of the Qiyamah, right? This is like, it may as well be taken straight out of the Alamuti Ismaili discourse of the Imam of one's being and that whole eschatological speculation by the Ismailis. But this is precisely what Ibn Arabi is saying here. Whoever wishes to discover the wisdom of Elias and Idris, which God established twice, then let him know that Idris was a prophet before Noah and was then raised up and sent down again as Elias. Thus, God gave him two missions. He lets him descend from the realm of his intellect to that of his lust until he becomes a pure animal, experienced what every other beast experiences, apart from the two heavy ones, man and jinn. Then he will know that he has realized his animality. Such a one may be recognized by two signs. The first is this revelation, so that he sees who is to be punished and who rewarded in the grave, and sees the dead man as living, the dumb speaking, and the sitting walking. The second sign is his dumbness, so that even if he wanted to speak of what he sees, he cannot do so. It is this that makes him realize to the full his animality. We once had a disciple who had such an experience, but he did not remain dumb and so did not fully realize his animality. When God established me in this station, I realized my animality to the full. I saw things and I wanted to express what I saw, but could not do so, being no different from those who cannot speak. When he has realized all this, he will be transformed into pure intellect, bereft of natural matter. Then he will see things that are at the source of what is manifest in natural forms, and will know in an immediate way the origin of this divine regime in the forms of nature. If he discovers that nature is the same as the breath of the merciful, then he has received a great favor. If, however, he realizes no more than that, what we have mentioned, so much gnosis will be enough to condition his intellect. He will then be one of the Gnostics and will know experientially the truth of his saying, you did not kill them, but God killed them. since it was only the iron and the striker who killed them, and he who is behind these forms. All in all, the killing and the shooting happened. Thus, the Gnostic sees things in principle and in forms, so being complete in his knowing. If, in addition to that, he sees the breath of the merciful, he is perfect as well as complete in his knowing. He sees only God as being that which he sees, perceiving the seer to be the same as the seen. This is enough, and God is the giver of grace, the guide. And this was the chapter of Elias. So I open the floor. Questions, comments, revelations, rants, speculations, whatever you want to talk about. Go for it.
It with this of Enoch returning,
Hmm.
um, has this tradition shown up anywhere other than Ibn Arabi before this, or is this the only?
This is a great question because there are these pseudo-epigraphic Jewish traditions, first of all, of Enoch being raised to become Metatron, the archangel, at least the Metatron of the sphere of Malkuth, and then returning as the archangel Metatron, right? But these are pseudo-epigraphica, and they occur only in the commentaries on the Book of Enoch within the Jewish tradition itself, which I find quite fascinating that even Arabi is kind of laying out an iteration of this very idea from the Book of Enoch or the commentaries on the Book of Enoch, which shows that he had some kind of knowledge of this Jewish tradition in Andalusia. So the answer to your question is kind of yes, in a roundabout sort of way. Yeah. By the way, it's good to hear your voice
Now the
because
text itself. Now the text itself of the Book of Enoch kind of dates itself in the um, er, I would
13th.
say the Hellenistic period. It sort of
Yeah.
says that this is a revelation that came from before the flood. So it's like arch archaizing itself, where it's trying to sort of someone got this from Revelation and received it earlier from a prior thing in the text
Mhm.
in that tradition. Um, it of course it's interesting within this context of a cause or an attribute being like before, after, and with, how that's a total different view of some of the um, way of viewing of forms and sort of a demythologizing of the way that text views things.
Yeah.
But I think I'm going to have to review this a little bit more.
This is I wish some of these commentaries were translated into English, even though the Ibn Arabi industry has grown and mushroomed over the last 30, 40 years. No one is really, other than perhaps one guy, Mukhtar Ali, who did translate the introduction to Qaisari's commentary as the Horizons of Being. I uploaded that in the Telegram list, that text. But some of these commentaries, especially the big commentary by Dawood Qaisari, really tickles this stuff out in a very nice way. And so, people who have Arabic, who are starting to go into graduate school, I think it would be worth your while to consider, if not translating the entirety of the commentaries, at least to do a study of this commentary style of these figures on the Fusus al-Hikam, because they tickle a lot of this stuff out and then bring historical context sometimes into their commentary as well. So we learned quite a lot. But what we learn here in this particular chapter is that Ibn Arabi was well aware of the Enoch traditions of Jewish pseudepigraphica, which says that at least in Spain and North Africa, and maybe even the Levant during his time, where he penned Fusus al-Hikam, that these pseudepigraphic Enoch traditions were well known about. And there you have, the Sufis kind of incorporating some of these stories and kind of novelizing on that. But I mean, this whole causality angle of Ibn Arabi can even, in some sense, be tickled out of the book of Enoch itself, the conclusion anyway. If Enoch is taken to heaven and becomes Metatron and then comes back, the question, at least in the text, is never answered. It is answered in the commentaries. Is that where was Metatron before Enoch was elevated to become it? And the answer in the commentary traditions in the book of Enoch is that Metatron was already the archangel of the face, and that basically Enoch was taken into Metatron to become one with it, with this archangel. But if we unpack this answer, this sort of gives us the same sort of causal trajectory that Ibn Arabi is talking about, such that Enoch the man was already the effect of the effect. The effect here being the effector being the archangel Metatron. You know, the way that they try to, kind of climb out of the conundrum of the sort of logic that Ibn Arabi is using is to claim that, there are two Metatrons. There's one Metatron at the crown in the Sephirotic tree of life, which is at the very top of the tree. And then there's the Metatron of the sphere of Malkuth. But that sort of begs the question, because the tree of life is just the emanation of the single Ein Sof, of the Godhead, right? And these spheres are not independent gods. They're just emanations that appear as the tree of life, as the universe. It's the same argument that Ibn Arabi is making about the cosmos or the great being. So that angle of even commentary on the book of Enoch and Enoch's ascension to the heavens to become Metatron is sort of one good window to kind of look at this whole causal argument that Ibn Arabi is employing here.
Now, from the context of the Bayan and the idea of return of the light of the Logos, there's something very interesting here.
Yeah.
I don't think I can really speak too much on it, but I'm hoping to learn more. Do you have anything you can explain here?
Well, I mean, extrapolating from this causality is that number one, the logos is the primal will. The primal will is another way of saying the most holy effusion that is incessantly producing everything out of itself, right? But that this primal will then inhabits at certain periodizations of history, embodies itself in certain humans, right? Such that then these humans become the return of the previous archetype that this primal will embodied, right? So the effector is also then becoming the affected at each periodic appearance of itself in a human form. Does that make sense?
Yes, I'm astounded in a little bit when I reflect on this.
Anybody else?
Uh, Hi. So
Right.
I have something, I guess, to share. It's maybe a bit different, but it's about like the intellect and its limits. So I spend a lot of time with people who have PhDs in math, and lately a lot of people have had a sort of existential dread about ChatGPT
Okay.
as being something that can do a lot what they can do because of its supposed ability to reason. And I
And to
guess one thing
learn.
I
And to
and to
learn.
learn.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess one thing I've been thinking about is what's the difference between this sort of reason and the sort of reason that really makes us human? The
Mm.
reasoning that something like ChatGPT can do because of its familiarity with symbols and that sort of synthesizing reason that humans are capable of.
Based on my interaction with ChatGPT and just AI in general, which I find a very worthwhile facility because it's allowing me to speed up my own process of producing texts. But what ChatGPT and AI in general is incapable of doing is to comprehend nuance. And I've argued with it many, many, many times. Like, for example, it doesn't understand that, for example, even though you ask it to give a definition of a word, right, in Arabic, but even dictionary definitions of words in the various lexicon and dictionaries of Arabic cannot capture the full range of a technical manner in which a particular word is employed in a particular context, right? And so I put a text in front of it, and it immediately, flags one or two words out of it as being out of place or incorrect, and then you tell it, well, you're wrong, based on this reason. This word or this phrase actually occurs in XYZ text, and this is the way that it's employed. And it just then it spends like 2 minutes uploading its memory, and then when you try it to get it to then amend and give you something substantial to work with, it freaks out. It gets mixed up. And I'm not only using the Google ChatGPT version, but other versions of AI. So it doesn't know what to do with nuance. And language is the plane of nuance, because language is the plane of meaning, right? So even in its in its staggering ability to contain information and reason, artificial intelligence, at least in this form, doesn't have that kind of sentience to be able to distinguish nuance. We may get there, we may get to a very alarmingly precise point of the capability of artificial intelligence to distinguish nuance. But the difference between a computer distinguishing nuance and a human being distinguishing nuance is still, there are chasms of separation between these two, right? Because of that element of actual self-reflexive consciousness. Just we have to remind ourselves that these are algorithms. These are, numbers running through complex systems. There's no consciousness involved. It's a process of computation. It's not a process of consciousness. But the debate is that, and this is, this ultimately kind of segues into the debate between organicists and their opponents, and people who are like my friend Kayvan Yahyoi, who works in the philosophy of mind. The debate between whether consciousness is a chemical process of computation or whether there's something more behind it. That debate exists even in the philosophy of mind. My answer to that question is pretty obvious. I think consciousness is something of a qualitatively higher reality than just simple chemical processes that may constitute a kind of a computation in the world. It's a cart before the horse kind of thing. So whether artificial intelligence will eventually get there or not, I don't think it will get completely to that point zero. But I think it may probably get near enough to it.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else? Zane, do you have anything?
I have something, just something that I was thinking about. So just thinking about this thing about the essence being a mirror in which we see what we want to see. It sounds like we see God according to our own idea about God. And then there's interesting kind of caveat there about the divine names as being more like particular mirrors. But it would seem like each of us has to go through one of those, because we are like individuations of the essence anyway. So we would have to look into the mirror of one name, but then we could see, I think within that name, we could see any of the infinite names, right? Because each of the names opens onto the totality of the names. I was just thinking about this. So it's such an interesting metaphor, but also connecting it with this kind of enigmatic passage about having courage in killing a snake, and the snake is yourself.
Yeah.
Because but it actually seems really logical for that paragraph to follow, because when I was reading the previous part, I was thinking, well, the only thing standing in the way between me and seeing God in multiple forms or in other forms that I'm not used to is my own limitations, like my own ego or my own beliefs. I insist that God is like this. And so then I look in the mirror and I can't see other images because I'm standing in the way of that. And so like that idea of killing the snake seems directly connected with this idea. I guess one thing I was questioning was, and this, I think it relates to the larger question about freedom and determinism that we've been talking about, that I still can't seem to wrap my head around, is like, is it really just up to me to just like push past all of my own egoic stuff, or is even, it would seem like even in that there's like there's a divine hand in even my own limitations. So like maybe it's both ways. Like God is kind of trying to pull me out of my ego, and I'm working on my end to like break through.
Very
I'm
good.
just trying to like imagine that.
That's a brilliant way to contextualize the whole issue. Yeah, basically that's the situation. And but also you have to simultaneously remember that while this dynamic between you and the spirit is going, this push and pull to draw you near, whatever you are drawn near to is still within that receptacle, which is yourself, which has a taqyid, a determination of a sort attached to it, right? Because the attainment of totality for each particular thing is an impossibility. But the mirroring of the totality through that receptacle is a possibility as a glimpse. If I were to contextualize this debate between Ibn Arabi and Ahmad Sirhindi between the difference between Wahdat al-Wujud and Wahdat al-Shuhud, it would be on this particular point. But this is something Ibn Arabi himself already articulates by saying that, look, we cannot attain the totality of divinity, right? We can only attain that totality which is already deposited within ourselves. Nevertheless, by virtue of that attainment, we can mirror that totality, whether on the level of the intellect or even on the level of witnessing. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So the wujud would be limited, but the shuhud is infinite. So the wujud is limited to my determination, but then through that I can witness. Is that?
But then again, wujud in its totality, in its non-delimited form, is itself non-delimited. And so your wujud al-mughayyad, which is another way of saying your quiddity, right, which is an accident of the wujud itself, is both determined by itself, but not determined by itself by virtue of being the accident of the absolute simultaneously. And so in that non-delimitation, at least the axiom of being able to grasp the totality is there in theory, although in actuality it doesn't occur that way because you are mughayyab. You're delimited.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, you can break this down further into kind of an easier formula, right? And look at it from this perspective. The axiom God, right, is universal, but within this universal axiom, our understanding of this universal axiom does not automatically entail that either we become that universal axiom or that or that others may recognize this universal axiom. So right there in the multiplicity, there are differentiations. Nevertheless, the axiom is universal. And when you then equate that universal axiom with being itself, wujud, then, whether someone agrees or disagrees with it, or whether they see themselves as a part of it or not a part of it, becomes a complete tangential irrelevancy. That is absolute existence and is. And you are within it at this very moment, but you're not its totality. Yet that totality flows saryan through you.
I
Yeah.
No, I'm done. You can go ahead, Stephen.
Oh, sorry. My father recently passed away. He was
My
a computer
condolences.
programmer.
My
One of
condolences.
the
Go ahead. Go ahead.
one of the things I sometimes, when we were discussing spiritually discussions, I used metaphors of what it would be like to be inside a computer program or a hologram, how inside a hologram, all pieces of information connect to the whole. And sometimes I wonder how bad those metaphors and how much I was off the track. Some of the spiritual metaphors in, or the way they talk about forms in Platonism, and I see some of that sometimes reflected in the way the language is translated into English.
Mm.
I don't know how good these translations are and if I should be using those to guide what some of these texts should be interpreted as. But this idea of connection to the whole and information sometimes makes me I don't know, just the way to think about it and to explain it is difficult for me to put into words.
Well, because it's ultimately not meant to be put into words, because whatever we language, if you use language as, if you use that, verb, which I do often and as an adverb, our languaging of things is occurring within dualism, within the duality, which is ultimately an illusion. So this thing transcends it. It unifies absolutely everything and occurs within everything, and there's no vacuum in existence where it is not present, right? So by trying to language it, we are in fact limiting it, even when we are using language to break through the confines of that dualism and duality itself. So, I look at it, I've come to this point because these issues used to concern me on one level, where you have a myriad of religious forms, you have a myriad of philosophical systems and metaphysical and theosophical approaches, all of that. Which one of them is right? Right? And one fine day, it dawned on me that actually none of them are. And all of them are right simultaneously. Why? Because this is all occurring within the greater stream of language. And this greater stream of language is occurring with the duality. God can occur in all of them and simultaneously transcend all of them too in his ultimate reality. So it really doesn't matter ultimately which perspective a person subscribed to in trying to understand the nature of God, so long as they're trying to understand the nature of God and don't fall into the prison of dogma about it, right? If you're truly on a suluk, on a path of wayfaring, right, it doesn't matter which approach you adopt, right? So long as you're navigating towards it in order to trying to understand it, which is what it wants you to do about it, because that understanding is a two-way street. Your understanding of it becomes the understanding of yourself, and through it, it becomes that understanding of itself through you, and on and on. This whole paradox goes. That is the point of the exercise, and this is why even though Ibn Arabi is very careful in how he crafts his argument, and sometimes he says things to shock and scandalize, but other times then he kind of brings it back into a very orthodox kind of contextualization. But the fact of the matter is that Sufis like Ibn Arabi completely understand this issue, that ultimately every last one of these myriad forms of religious dogma, philosophical systems, theologies, systems of dogma and thought, they all fall short of the ultimate reality. None of them can possibly capture the totality. It is impossible for it to do that. So why don't we just submit to this facticity and celebrate by navigating and exploring this reality in its amazing, multifacetedness and totality, rather than to, incessantly argue about who is right and who is wrong and whether our path leads to salvation or doesn't. Because, ultimately it comes down to this question, in the way that humans have phrased it in the social world of the social life world of history, is a ridiculous approach to things. It's completely stupid in the way that human beings have dealt with these ultimate questions, other than these types of figures like Ibn Arabi or the Bab or the Ismailis or other Sufis and other philosophers and mystics, etc., etc. They have gone for the reality. They have tried to understand the nature of this ultimate reality, and each of them, by being bound to the culture and the historical period and whatnot that they occurred in, have articulated their experiences and their knowledge through that particular prism. But it in itself is beyond it all, literally.
I wonder how, when reflecting on it, one can get across various disagreements of opinions and ways of looking at it to help humanity unify, to look at some of the extreme problems and divisions that are in these conflict zones and such. And I don't know, we have this incredible world, and then we see it. I mean, there are small places we can do justice around us, and there's this huge, um, mark of capitalism and the destruction and abuse of power, colonialism and supremacy, and proxy war and abuse. And it's amazing how that these problems exist. It seems like an unsolvable problem, like what is it, the knot that Alexander cut, but
Yeah,
like it couldn't be actually removed normally, sort of this undo, like I hate to keep using software metaphors, but like being in a game that could not be won seems to be the reality we find ourselves in.
Well, if you think of the house as being God, and the house in this sense being kind of a cosmic casino, then the house always wins in the end, right? No matter
Of course.
how the system may be rigged from one point of view. If you've got some kind of a crooked, poker player that goes in the casino thinking they can milk the house has set up itself in such a way that even if you were the most sophisticated card swindler, you cannot walk out of that casino with your shirt on your back. This is what is happening. I mean, right now in this age, the way I've started to look at it is that it's almost biblical in the sense that the human world has structured itself to have all these multiple loci of golden calves everywhere, to which everybody in every subculture is bowing to their own version of, right? And so eventually the proverbial Moses is going to come down from Sinai, is going to be quite pissed at this reality of seeing these virtual Israelites bowing to the golden calf. And he's going to cast those 10 commandments in that thing's general direction, and it's going to explode, and they're all going to, swoon, and all the rest of the imagery that we read in the Bible.
19 commandments.
19 commandments. Or similar. I mean, look, it is happening. I mean, if you had told me the reality that we live in today 10 years ago, I would have said you're on you're tripping, seriously tripping. The polarization is on such a tangible, deep, and acute level that at some point, the very natural processes of things itself is going to unravel everything very fast. And we are getting very close to that point zero with each passing day. So I'm, in one sense, I am heartened that this process is happening because inertia is death in a real sense. So there is a movement that is going on that is going to unravel this dialectic on a mass level very soon. Once we get to that point zero, in the aftermath of it, or what Evola called being among the men amongst the ruins, then there is a leaven of sorts to work with to craft the better world. I don't think this is going to be multipolarism the way that the Russians or the Chinese, etc., conceive it, but it's definitely going to be the epitaph of the unipolar, Anglo-American empire and its capitalism. That is coming, and these Jordan Petersons and their acolytes and etc. can rant and rave as much as they want about wanting to save Western civilization. Western civilization is terminally ill, and the evidence for this is everywhere, and it is about to come crash tumbling down. And we may even see it next week after the election of the U.S. elections, whoever wins it. But this is a process that humanity itself collectively, and not just one group of people over another, but everybody has in one way or another contributed to. And so we, in a sense, are propelling ourselves to that point zero. And once that point zero comes, right, that is a qiyamah, in a sense. That is a resurrection with all the apocalyptic and catastrophic imagery that accrues from such an event. And then we can create something. But from another angle, humanity being the way it is, okay? Humanity being the way it is, we cannot expect mass enlightenment. I used to kind of be an advocate for this, that, let us, all the masses, let them wake up from their slumber. It doesn't, it's not, world is not structured this way. There's always supposed to be a balance between the knowers and the know-nots. The Quran speaks to it, the Bible speaks to it, all of the scriptures speak to it, and even our own experience of the world and our people speaks to it. That people are in different places. It is just where they are. And there will always in any given age be a very few number of people who are truly awake. Everybody else being in various levels of slumber and sleep. That is the way humanity has been from the beginning. It will never change.
Well, can I ask a question?
So sure.
Looking at things like that, do you think is there any point then in trying to, there's a lot of people out there who consider themselves I don't know, what do you call it, light workers and missionaries and all these other truth warriors. Is there any point to any of that? What's the point? I mean, if in the end what you said is true.
Well, in small little enclaves, quote unquote, I don't like that term because it's so new agey, the whole light worker thing. If people who are genuine light workers and are and are trying to genuinely instill a little nur here and there in their own immediate environment amongst their friends, not only is that is the point of the exercise. What I'm saying, and what many have kind of come to, is that this, mass awakening is an impossibility. It just doesn't happen.
I'm sorry. It just is that seems to be the expectation or the hope that all of those people that I just referred to, who are self-proclaimed light workers and truth warriors, that's the goal that they're trying to reach, is some sort of mass awakening and mass. I know.
They're setting themselves up for disappointment because it's
disappointment.
I mean, the first question I always ask these people is that you point out to me one point in the known documented history of humanity where this has actually occurred. And if it hasn't occurred, okay, let us say that you get a unique event in human history happening. How will this look? And they can't explain it. So if you cannot even conceive of what this mass awakening is and what its details are, what exactly are you working for? Just concentrate on the immediate, or your own immediate surrounding. Create your own. Even I have even gone so far as to contextualize this way: create your own ummah of people, your own immediate, whether it's your own immediate family or comrades or whatever. Just create your own. In the way that my friend Peter Lambert Wilson used to put it, that create your own temporary autonomous zone of friendships and camaraderie and all that kind of stuff. Why do you want to save the world when it doesn't want to be saved? This is the thing that we got to understand. The world in its mass, in its collectivity, does not want to be saved. They don't want to be saved. You can't force them. And what right do we have to try to force people to be saved? You know?
Yeah.
If the world doesn't want
Sorry, the whole situation is actually, it's hilarious, isn't it? I
yes,
mean,
it
it's
is.
really ridiculous.
It is absolutely. It is the divine comedy. I mean, Dante couldn't have come up with a better story.
Yeah.
But that's the situation. So save yourself and save only those who wish to be saved. Don't try to go out there and forcefully try to save people in the street. This is why I laugh at these evangelical Christians who are wanting to save people even in spite of. So why do you care? I mean, and who appointed you? When Jesus, according to even your own narratives, went down to hell after the crucifixion to try to liberate hell, and obviously, implicitly, certain populations of hell refused to be even saved by Christ when they were in hell itself. Who are you to try to want to save the world? Leave them alone. Only go for those who have that receptivity to want to be elevated to another level. Leave everybody else alone.
Exactly. I agree. Although I have to say though, we are in a very interesting situation with, with the internet, the technology that we all have at our disposal now. I mean, I'm not sure. I don't know if humanity ever had access to this sort of technology in the remote past, but not that we know of, but we've got it now. And for me, this technology might be like a game changer, like in terms of what was possible for the last several thousand years, maybe, or what was impossible for several thousand years might be approaching possible at this point. I
And
don't know. Like it's
that is the potentiality which the current evidence of things is actually disproving. I mean, I've had this conversation many times online. Is that, are we smarter now than we were 30 years ago? And my answer keeps on being no. In fact, the people 20, 30 years ago, especially at the time when I was at college, were smarter and actually more active. And they were not so intellectually or spiritually lazy as they are now. What the internet has done has made people both intellectually and spiritually lazy. And so the social engineers have looked at them and looked at it as a golden opportunity for mass propagandizing. And this is what we're watching and witnessing over and over and over again, the myriad of contexts. You have these big tech companies, Face, Meta, X, Twitter, etc., with these plutocrats who represent them, herding and sheepdogging millions and millions of people from one policy objective to another. Whether it was the election of Trump in 2016, whether it's going to happen again this next week with Trump, or a myriad of different things. And even though scandal after scandal after scandal keeps pouring out about the activities and the behavior of these big plutocrats and their companies, yet nothing changes. And from one period to the next, it gets worse. So are we better off now than we were 30 years ago? And my answer is no, we are not. So how has technology palpably made this humanity better? And at this point, maybe, this may change in the future, but at this present juncture that we're in, it hasn't. It has made it worse.
Yeah. That's a good point. Although I have to say, like just monitoring my own audience, I can see that there is a development in process. I mean, there are bigger numbers who are seeming to become more and more like-minded and more agreeable, even though in the beginning there might have been, a bigger distance between some segments of some of the demographics. The distances between demographics seem to be shrinking from my perspective, like at the moment, but that's just looking at my own thing. But yeah, I know what you mean. But at the same time that that's happening, you've also got a proliferation of more and more propaganda, more and more engineering and manipulation. So it's
And
like a
more and more,
double-edged sword.
and couple that with more and more isolation, people are more
Yeah,
inclined to sit behind their phones or their laptops or whatever than they are to go out there and actually connect and interact with real people in the real world. That is another problem. So my answer is like, well, so what that more and more people are being herded together in various virtual subcultures. If this doesn't translate into an actual effect in the real world, that undermines the power and the influence of these big uh, corporate plutocrats, and what good is it? So what we are in is in a form of digital totalitarianism, where even our attempted independence is being in some way managed, and we're being herded and sheepdogged, even in our perceived independence from one thing to another. This beast is very sophisticated. It's not as unsophisticated as most people think it is. But its worst enemy is awareness, and its worst enemy is the self-awareness of a given subject, and to understand what the game is. And so the more that we understand this game, and understand its details and go into it as far deeper as possible, and then from our understanding, we actually take concrete steps and actions. That is the real threat to this.
yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else? Okay, if that's all she wrote. Next week, we're going to be reading this chapter of Luqman. This is also a somewhat interesting chapter, not a very long one, shorter than what we just read. The zikr obviously associated with it is Yahasanu, and we're almost done. We got what? Let's see. We got only a few chapters left. So Luqman, Aaron, Moses, and Khalid and Muhammad. That is 5 chapters. So Moses and Khalid are going to be incorporated in the first and second sessions. And then there's Muhammad. So that's 4 weeks. So we have only about maybe 5, 6 weeks left of this course. And then we are finished with the Fusus al-Hikam. And inshallah, you can go away as being some kind of expert, being experts of some description on this text. Anyway, until next week, everybody be well, and we'll come back together next week, same time, and look at this further chapters. So, yeah, Anisu, until then.